Richard Nixon was kicked out of office and replaced by the only unelected president in American history. So we went from the most popular president to a president nobody voted for. Wait a minute, you may ask, why didn't I know that? Wasn't Richard Nixon a criminal? Wasn't he despised by all decent people? No, he wasn't.
Tucker Carlson has attempted to rewrite history many times, but he may have topped himself last night by claiming that President Richard Nixon was a great guy who was framed for Watergate by none other than the deep state. So why does Tucker Carlson believe that the deep state wanted to get rid of Nixon? Let's watch.
Richard Nixon believed that elements in the federal bureaucracy were working to undermine the American system of government and had been doing that for a long time. He often said that. He was absolutely right. On June 23rd, 1972, Nixon met with the then CIA director Richard Helms at the White House. During the conversation, which thankfully was tape recorded, Nixon suggested he knew, quote, who shot John, meaning President John F. Kennedy. Nixon further implied that the CIA was directly involved in Kennedy's assassination, which we now know it was. Helms' telling response? Total silence. But for Nixon, it didn't matter because it was already over.
Tucker's rabbit hole goes even deeper than that. Watch as he claims that Watergate was all a setup.
4 days before, on June 19th, the Washington Post had published the first of many stories about a break-in at the Watergate office building. Unbeknownst to Nixon and unreported by the Washington Post, 4 of the 5 burglars worked for the CIA. The first of many dishonest Watergate stories was written by a 29-year-old Metro reporter called Bob Woodward. Who exactly was Bob Woodward? Well, he wasn't a journalist. Bob Woodward had no background whatsoever in the news business. Instead, Bob Woodward came directly from the classified areas of the federal government. Shortly before Watergate, Woodward was a naval officer at the Pentagon. He had a top secret clearance. He worked regularly with the intel agencies. Soon after leaving the Navy, for reasons that have never been clear, Woodward was hired by the most powerful news outlet in Washington and assigned the biggest story in the country. And just to make it crystal clear what was actually happening, Woodward's main source for his Watergate series was the deputy director of the FBI, Mark Felt. And Mark Felt ran, and we're not making this up, the FBI's COINTELPRO program, which was designed to secretly discredit political actors the federal agencies wanted to destroy.
Contrary to what Tucker just told you, Bob Woodward actually worked for a different news outlet for an entire year before he was hired by the Washington Post. And I have some more information debunking some of Tucker's other lies. But before we get to that, I want to bring you guys in on this. Cenk, what are your thoughts on Tucker rehabilitating Nixon's image?
Yeah, so there's a couple of some really interesting things that come out of this. First of all, to be fair to Tucker, he is a magician and a good one. There's sleights of hand everywhere, like 3-card Monty, right? Just moving the cups. Which card is it? Which card is it? It's all sleight of hand. So let me explain 2 of them that he just did that you saw with your own eyes. Number 1, he says, now you think that Nixon's a very unpopular politician. That's what you always hear. But did you know that's not true at all, that he's deeply popular. He won the 72 election in a landslide. Wait a minute now. He's talking about 2 different time periods. Did Nixon win in a landslide in 72? Yes, he did. If that was the end of the story, then you would say Nixon is a deeply popular politician. Whether we liked him or not, he won in a landslide, that's true. But what Tucker doesn't tell you is he became deeply unpopular once people found out what he was actually doing, which was after the 72 election. Then they found out that he had hired these people, the people that, says, they had background in the CIA, the people that broke into Watergate, Tucker says. What he doesn't tell you is Nixon aides directly hired those guys. And on the tapes, Nixon is clearly aware that they are hiring these people to break into Watergate. He leaves all of that out. And if you're not an expert on Watergate history, and you're a regular schmuck who watches Fox News, you're never gonna know that. You're gonna say, oh wow, they worked at the CIA before. And oh wow, he was really popular. Oh wow, okay. And then there's one more sleight of hand. And even though, look, he says it right in front of you, but he thinks his audience isn't paying attention and is not logical and can't connect things. So he says, he had this meeting with the head of the CIA and he says, I know who killed JFK. Now, by the way, after I let everybody, we're all gonna go and give our opinions on this, but I'm gonna come back to, there actually was a deep state. And so there's a kernel of truth in the JFK story, which is how they get you to believe a lot of this stuff, but I'm gonna come back to that. But he says, he gets a CIA guy in there, and he says, I know who killed John. But he was already toast because 4 days earlier, the Washington Post had started to write these stories about the Watergate break-in. Wait a minute, if he tells the head of the CIA, he knows the CIA killed JFK, and then they set out a trap to get him, why was the trap sprung 4 days earlier when the head of the CIA didn't even know that Nixon thought that? That makes no logical sense at all. And in fact, it destroys his whole story. But he thinks my audience isn't bright enough to figure it out, even though I just told them that the CIA didn't even know Nixon was against them. No, he just said that he knows who killed John. But even if he was against them, then how the hell did they get Bob Woodward to write the story 4 days ago? Man, to be fair, the next segment on Tucker Carlson is going to be, and you know what else the deep state did? They invented the hot tub time machine. Okay, absurd. All right, Lance.
I think Watergate is the one that everyone knows when they talk about Richard Nixon. People should also keep in mind, and I wish this was taught more when it comes to the history of the United States, but there was an opportunity for the war in Vietnam to be ended earlier than it was. And unfortunately, Henry Kissinger seemed pretty dead set on just ravaging other ancillary countries who weren't directly involved in the war, including Laos and Cambodia, that got horrifying bombing campaigns by the United States on them. And in order to have political opportunism, they saw an opportunity to actually extend the Vietnam War and continue to ravage these countries horrifyingly. And like, it's one of those things where Nixon should have been, if there was any justice, in jail for war crimes, along with Henry Kissinger, rather than being like, friends with modern day politicians. But that's just the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah, I want to bring it back to something you said, Cenk, because you said that Tucker is a magician with his lies, and I couldn't agree more, because his lies are particularly clever because he's taking real parts of history, like the CIA's involvement in the JFK assassination, the full extent of which is still not known, the lack of reporting on Nixon's relationship with Richard Helms, and the COINTELPRO operation. But then he twists those facts around to arrive at the totally nonsensical conclusion that Richard Nixon was innocent. So let's just debunk one of those claims as an example, and in doing so, we'll expose how Tucker's entire argument was bogus. So Tucker Carlson said the meeting between Richard Nixon and Richard Helms, in which Nixon said he knew who shot John, happened on June 23rd, 1972. It didn't. That meeting happened on October 8th, 1971, according to Jefferson Morley of Politico. And during that meeting, Nixon showed no interest in exposing the CIA for no reason. What Nixon actually wanted was more information on the Bay of Pigs incident. So Politico reported that the ambush in Dallas was the first thing on Nixon's mind as he pressed the director for the agency's Bay of Pig files. Nixon had no desire to expose what Helms called the agency's dirty linen. Rather, he wanted to use the Bay of Pigs issue against presumed rival Ted Kennedy while defending the CIA from recent allegations that the CIA's plot against Castro had led to the JFK's death. Nixon knew the agency was vulnerable to the JFK assassination, which he presumed would give him leverage over Helms. So what really happened on June 23rd, 1972, the date that Tucker Carlson brought up, is that Richard Nixon was recorded telling his chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman, to tell Richard Helms, that if the CIA did not help Nixon cover up Watergate, Nixon would spill the beans on the whole Bay of Pigs thing. So here's how that went, according to Politico. In his memoir, The Ends of Power, Haldeman wrote that when he relayed Nixon's message about the Bay of Pigs, Helms exploded, shouting, "This has nothing to do with the Bay of Pigs." Haldeman reported back to Nixon that the gambit had worked and Helms had pledged to help with the FBI. And indeed, he had. Helms sent word to acting FBI Director L. Patrick Gray to taper off the investigation. But when Gray pushed back a few weeks later, Helms acquiesced and the investigation continued. So we have Tucker Carlson lying about a well-documented historical event. Cenk, what is his motivation in doing this?
Yeah, I think that he's testing the boundaries of Fox News. What he's doing is, let me take the most outrageous, insane conspiracies and put them out there. Let me do outrageous lies, put them out there. Let me do outrageous racism, put it out there. No more coded nonsense. He's basically, you'll see, He said it a couple of days ago that South Africa has only gotten worse since they got rid of apartheid. So he's arguing in favor of apartheid. Okay, he's going full bore lunatic populist. Why? One, I think he eventually wants to run for president, and he has deduced that the Republican voters are nuts. The more conspiracy theories you give them, the more they like you. He has overwhelming evidence to that effect. Look at Trump. Oh, Obama wasn't born here. Oh, the election was stolen. You inject yourself with bleach and that's how you get rid of COVID. I mean, any one lunatic rant after another, and it got him more and more popular. One lie after another. Trump broke every lying record. George Santos is an amateur compared to Trump. So Tucker Carlson learned from all of that. He's replicating it, and he thinks, look, these guys suckers at Fox News are paying me tons of money to get this giant audience, right? And the audience loves this. He's #1 on Fox News. And secondarily, if they fire me at Fox News because I'm exposing them to too much liability through all my lies, well, then I become a martyr and a hero of the right wing. And he would have an excellent chance of winning the Republican nomination. And everybody else goes, oh yeah, I don't know about that. He has a ton of fame. He has the #1 show on cable news. He has a ton of money. Why wouldn't he? Why is it implausible that he would run for president? It's very, very plausible, and he's taking all of those chances, all of those steps. And the one thing that the mainstream cannot get through their thick heads is they keep thinking, oh no, man, this will turn off the Republican moderates. There are no Republican moderates. Tucker's much smarter than you. You know how I call Republicans dumbasses all the time. Trump's a dumbass. Crowder's a dumbass. I've said that already in today's show. You name me a Republican and I'll show you why he's a dumbass. But Tucker's not among them. Tucker's smart and he's correctly figured out the Republican voters are suckers and they love this nonsense. That's why he's feeding it to them. And by the way, I'll say one more quick thing about what Rayvana said. Look, guys, there was a deep state back then. And read a real book from a real journalist, David Talbot. He started Salon, great journalist. He wrote The Devil's Chessboard about how Allen Dulles was fired, the head of the CIA, was fired by John F. Kennedy. And what a deep state means is a group of people that are not officially part of the government, and Dulles put together people that were ex-CIA and some people that might still have been in the CIA to do this plot. We think that is where most of the evidence is going towards. The fact that that deep state existed back then doesn't mean that Nixon was opposed to the deep state. As Ray just showed you in the quotes, he actually loved the deep state and he wanted to use the CIA against his political opponents like Ted Kennedy. But Tucker Carlson did that old trick. Where's the card? Where's the card? Where's the card? Oh, the deep state exists and they must have been against Nixon. And poor popular Nixon was taken down by the deep state. No, he loved those guys. He was a fake populist. He was corrupt through and through. There's overwhelming evidence that he took money. He broke into Watergate. He was as corrupt a politician as you could possibly imagine. And by the way, another reason why Tucker Carlson really likes him. Thanks for watching The Young Turks. I really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.